I want to welcome everybody, and I hope that people will stick around for the other events that Steve Kidd mentioned earlier. Shelly and I talked about this in advance, and we decided that we want to try to keep this very informal. We actually met the first time over dinner, and so we talked about making this the sort of thing where people introduce themselves over a meal. So rather than me introducing Shelly and telling you all sorts of wonderful things about her, which I could easily do, she is going to introduce herself just the same way she would if all of us were sitting around a table for a meal. Before we do that, just one quick thing is if you have questions, and we hope you do, use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. NHA staff will be monitoring that, and they will be synthesizing questions to give to me, which I will be then watching for and can throw at Shelly after we're done with our conversation towards the end. So if anything occurs to you, any curiosity as you're listening, just put it in the Q&A. So why don't we start, Shelly, with your introduction?
Well, good morning. Thank you. Yat e she Shelly Lowe yanashia belagana neshle nanastasia tachini bashichi belagana dashache do trabaja dashanale lo cantiel de nasha do Cambridge, Massachusetts na shagan. Good morning, Jim, and good morning, everybody. As you know, my name is Shelly Lowe. I'm Navajo. I'm originally from Ganado, Arizona. I currently live and work in Cambridge, Massachusetts on the traditional territory of the Massachusetts tribe. I am the new chair, real short word, of the National Endowment for the Humanities. It has been a whirlwind month for the past 4 weeks now. Literally a month ago today, I was sworn in, but I'm not new to NEH. I served on the council for about 6 years and got to learn about all the work that the agency does, all of the amazing projects that are going on across the country and internationally. And Jim, I think one of the things that you had asked me was how I got into work in the humanities. And it's a really simple answer. I failed calculus in college. I failed calculus my freshman year. And I had gone into college thinking, I love math. This is great. I love doing math. I really want to think about what that may be like as a career. I had no idea what a career in math would be like. And then I got into a calculus class freshman year, and I had no idea what they were talking about. It was a completely different language. It blew me away. And I just said, that's it. I'm not doing this anymore. So I took a sociology class. And in that class, I started to think about, where I grew up, where I came from, the differences I was seeing between rural reservations, urban areas in Arizona, and really trying to understand, what does that mean? How did this happen? And what does it mean for thinking about how to move things forward, right? How to move tribal communities forward, how to move ourselves forward individually. And that was, I think, where my work really started to focus on more a humanities basis. I started to take American Indian Studies courses, which really opened my eyes for the first time to understanding, things like how were reservations created? Why did we live on a reservation? And what did that mean? The legalities of it. But, you can't have just the legality part. I also focused on the culture because that was so important to what I knew growing up. And so that became my introduction into the humanities, right? A real crossover of trying to figure out how to balance where I came from, the knowledge that I came from, with all of these brand new ways of looking at things and experiences that I was starting to have. And, I think I got asked to be on this board and I got asked to be on that board. And I said, okay, let's do that. And it just kept going. Can somebody called me up one day, president wants to nominate you for the National Endowment for the Humanities. And I was like, what is that? I don't even know what that is. I looked up the word humanities just to make sure I understood. And I said, okay, let's do that. So that's kind of been my entryway into this field. And I've been really, really blessed to have a good picture of what all makes up humanities and, the very important impact that it has on everyday life.
Which I think is interesting, Shelley, because that emphasis on volunteering, on saying yes when people to ask you to serve on this, that, or the other board, is such a long tradition in American culture, going back to Tocqueville's Democracy in America, where he argues that that kind of volunteering ethos is central to the maintenance of American, the health of American democracy, which is obviously something that we'll get to and is, I think, on everybody's mind right now. But maybe let's think about the bridge here. So you've given us your foundation. This is the foundation upon which you have built your career. What's the foundation that you're going to build on at the NEH? Could you talk a little bit about what's been accomplished in the past year by the, quite frankly, wonderful staff with whom I've worked, who have operated under the difficult situation of not having a chair, but having a extremely qualified chief of staff and interim chair. What have they accomplished, and how do you then take what they've accomplished to this kind of broader conception that you have?
That is a really great question. And, the really lucky thing for me is I've come into an agency that has had such a great staff working for the past year, who have really looked at the Biden-Harris administration priorities, have looked at the work of the agency and said, okay, this is what we do, and this is exactly how we can address some of these priorities. So as you and Kelsey talked about last year, right, the 5 pillars that the administration kind of put in place and were set up for the work of the agency. And when I came in, or I was asked to, come into this position, and I had been made familiar with the pillars as a council member, I felt very strongly in a number of cases that yes, this is exactly what needs to happen. This is exactly what I've been thinking about and even saying in certain instances in some of our meetings. These are really important things that not just we need to address as an agency, but I do strongly feel that we need to address as a country. And of course, the first one is improving racial equity, diversity, access. And this is a topic that I've been really asking about within the agency for the past few years, looking at where applications are coming from, looking at where funding is going. And to me, just wondering, why aren't we getting applications from places like tribal colleges? Why aren't we getting applications from small communities and small museums? I sat in a New England museum conference, and a small museum director said, we're a small museum. We can't apply for things like NEH. We would never be competitive. And I wanted to say, why? Why wouldn't you be competitive? I don't understand. So, this is me coming in saying we should be doing a better job. And so the staff has really worked to identify ways to make sure that we can do those things. So one of the things that I was all for it, and I said, yes, this is what we need. We need to have data. We need to have a better way of capturing what we're doing, where we're reaching, where we're not reaching. And so we're going to think really strongly about how to create a research office within the agency, so within our administrative side, because we've got to have data to collect and be able to analyze how effective we are, what kind of program policies we're helping to develop within institutions, and seeing exactly how the work that we're doing can advance equity and support underserved communities. It's not, I came from an underserved community, and there's just a lot more work that we can be doing, and having the data to be able to lead us into that work, I think, is really important. The second part of that is
Shelley,
Yep.
On that, I think one of the things that's interesting on that, by the way, is that the American Historical Association has a regrant program from the NEH's, from the ARP program and the American Rescue Plan. And that was exactly the goal of our regrant program, was to try to get smaller organizations that had never applied to apply. And it's interesting, it was very successful. We had a large number of applications for grants of under $75,000. But it's interesting what the skew was, which I can discuss with your staff. And it's exactly what you're describing, that institutions where previously marginalized populations were the most active were still the least likely to apply. So I applaud the way you're doing this, because I think that what you're describing is the only route to where we're trying to get.
Yes, and I think that, you know, one of the other issues, and it's a difficult one for many small institutions, right? I mean, we had $210 million in emergency relief funds between CARES and American Rescue Plan. And there were quite a few, we've tons of applications, as you know, tons of applications. And many applications were just deemed ineligible because there were things that weren't submitted correctly online. And it's, you know, I haven't had to submit a grant online through grants.gov. I think that it can be a cumbersome application to get through in many cases. And there have got to be ways that we can start to look at that and alleviate some of the obstacles that smaller organizations have when it's just getting the material in, right? If they can't
Yes.
even get the material in, well, we need to figure out what's going on in that case.
I think you're right. I mean, we found that because the organizations submitting to us, which had to have a maximum budget, their maximum annual budget had to be less than $750,000. So these are small. They didn't have to submit through grants.gov. So much less intimidating, and it makes a huge difference. Okay, I interrupted you. Continue.
That's okay. You know, you brought up a really great point, because I think one of the things that a part of really addressing access and increasing our reach is a couple of things. The state humanities councils do an amazing job reaching some of these populations and some of these communities. And through a bunch of their re-grant programs, right, we saw a bunch of NEH funding, federal funding going out into communities that needed it the most. And they're starting to make inroads and connections. And these are really great models for us to follow as an agency. But we really do need to identify within the work that we do avenues for us to do outreach, right? To reach out to these communities, to be a face, to be a name, right? I think that, you know, the Washington Post asked me, and, you know, you've heard of NEH before. What were your thoughts about it? And I said, you know, I'm sure that I hadn't heard of NEH before. I had been to museums, my kids watched PBS. I saw the name, but it didn't mean that I understood what NEH was or what NEH did. And, you know, that's part of our challenge, right? Is making sure people understand who we are, what we do, and how they can start to get involved, how they can start to connect with us. And having staff who are really dedicated and can do some of that outreach is going to be really key. And that's something that we're going to build upon.
Did you want to continue with the pillars? Here we are, 2 years into a pandemic, and I still forget to turn off the mute button.
You know, it's hard, and sometimes I forget to turn it off, and that's that's even worse. You know, one of the other pillars that has been really important, and I'm really excited about looking at, is addressing climate, right? And the effects that climate is going to have on our cultural heritage and our cultural collections. This is going to be key there. You know, when we talk about these small institutions, under-resourced institutions, we're talking about some really important collections that need to be preserved. And how are we going to help them preserve this, especially in areas where climate change is really going to create some problems for flooding, for fires. It's going to be really difficult. One of the projects that we're really looking at and trying to figure out is how to map the cultural heritage across the country, especially in areas where climate issues can really be causing damage and causing some irreparable damage, right? We could lose a lot of our cultural heritage if we haven't figured out, one, where the cultural heritage is, but two, how do we help organizations really plan and prepare and make sure that they're able to figure out how to handle extreme weather, how to mitigate and build capacity within their own institutions and within their organizations. So documenting is going to be a big issue and a big project that we're going to try to figure out. And then part of that is also how do we support the research that goes into looking at the cultural and historic records about climate and how climate has impacted not just, collections, but how has climate impacted language? How has climate impacted culture? How has climate impacted society? We talk about understanding the past and analyzing the present so we can have a view of the future. This is a topical area, the environment and climate, that we really do need to understand the past so we can analyze what's going on and have a really key view of what we need to have in the future to make sure that we can take care of our cultural heritage.
Well, you won't need to convince a historian that we have to understand the past. So that's an easy one. That cultural heritage that you've pointed to includes democracy. Our cultural heritage includes those famous words: government of the people, by the people, for the people. And I live 8 blocks from the Capitol, and so that issue has been extremely poignant for me in the last 14 months or so. And obviously, we look at other parts of the world right now, and we're not the only one whose heritage includes democratic government. Could you talk a little bit about how strengthening our democracy in a nonpartisan way through programming would be part of what you're going to be doing at the NEH as well? Country's history, democratic traditions, constitutional principles. This is part of who we are just as much as what you've been talking about culturally.
Right, exactly. And our founding legislation states that democracy demands wisdom. And I'm always going to go back to humanities has a foundation in knowledge, and kind of is the foundation sometimes of the knowledge that we have as a people and as a society. And humanities, the work that we do is seeking out information that will inform us who we are, inform ourselves better of how we came to be who we are as a democracy. What were the really important the really important eras that we've gone through, the changes in particular that we've seen as a society. I think many of us, it's been a rough 2 years. It was difficult to go into lockdown and have to stay home, and then it was even more difficult to sit in your home. And I was here and I watched while 3 miles away downtown was looted and Newberry Street was looted, and there were protests and people were angry, and it was hard. It was hard to watch that and say and try to understand what is going on. Why is this happening? People were angry, and part of me really had to step back and say, why are they angry? What has happened? What has gotten us to this point where individuals are so angry, and they're trying to say something. They're clearly trying to say something. What is it that they're trying to say, and why? I was always told as a Native person, or one of the things that I heard more recently from a Native elder is that your Native identity is based on you knowing the land that you come from, but it's also the land knowing you. And I can take this and say, part of a democracy is knowing your country. And with that, your country needs to know you. And I feel sometimes that we don't always know who you is in this country. I think we have a general story that we tell, but there are a lot of people that are left out in that story, a lot of experiences that we haven't brought to the forefront. And that's what the humanities work does, right? We bring those stories into the forefront. And it's better for us to be able to say, we have this knowledge through the humanities about who we are as a country, who we are as individual people, very diverse individual people. And if we can better know that, I think we can better, hopefully, get to a point where we can, come together and say, this is where we need to go, and, in our own way, do what we need to do to get there.
I mean, I think that's especially interesting, this notion of, and I've never heard it put quite that way before, your country knowing you being one way of talking about the importance of the nonpartisan nature of the NEH, and the knowing you be all Americans, regardless of where they live, There's a perception that the NEH and other things the government does is for particular people, especially on the coasts, especially with certain educations. And the notion of knowing everybody as a government agency is, I think, a different approach.
I think it, well, I hope so. You know, Jim, I'm going to be learning for the next few years. I have been learning for the past 6 years. And you know, I will continue to learn. I'll be learning my entire life about, you know, what this country is, who's in this country, and the different stories and all, you know, the cultures that are a part of it. But you know, I'm excited. I'm looking forward to that, and it is. I think it will give me a better understanding of trying to view what the future can be, and trying to say, okay, I can be a part of that, and you know, let me move my work forward to be able to do that.
So that notion of lifelong learning that you just talked about, of learning your entire life, which is the goal that we have for, obviously, when we in higher education, in liberal arts education, that's our goal, is to develop that kind of hunger for lifelong learning. That has a research component to it too, as does the NEH. And I think some of our audience here in particular is going to be very curious about your vision of the NEH as a funder of advanced academic research.
This is exciting. So, you know, as I say that I'm a lifelong learner, part of the learning that I've done in the past 6 years is just getting a glimpse, just a small glimpse into all of the research that is being funded by NEH. And, you know, I'm on the lucky side, right? I get to see what gets funded and the research that gets funded, but also what funding is out there that people are applying to and, you know, aren't necessarily getting funded through us, right? It's been astounding to see the level of diversity in the research that individuals are doing out there and are applying for humanities NEH funding for. You know, I think that we're looked at as a cultural agency, but we've been doing research, you know, since the beginning. We've been supporting research. We've been working very closely with NSF, National Institutes of Health. I always have been very impressed by the amount of work that we do with NSF on endangered languages, particularly indigenous languages in this country. And the fact that, you know, this research that we're helping to support is going to build a foundation that we may not see the fruits of it for generations, right? But, you know, that little seed of research that we are doing could really blossom in generations into full-fledged fluent speakers down the road, right? And that's going to be just one of the most beautiful things I think that we can look at in terms of the impact that we've been doing as an agency. But I think beyond that, NEH is in a really unique position to, we make public research possible. We open up collections to the public so that they can start to look at them, so that scholars can come in and really make use of these materials. You know, we often are going in and we're helping to digitize collections, we're helping to put it out there. And even if you're not doing research, right, we're putting things out there for individuals to gain knowledge from it. So I think that, you know, our work is supporting research, getting research materials out there for people to be able to have access to them, but also, you know, really supporting institutions, organizations, and understanding and helping them to be clear about how they need and want their collections to be cared for, right? And how they want them to be used. Because some collections can be fairly sensitive, and we definitely want them to be available for research. We want them to be available for knowledge use, but we want to make sure that we're doing that in the right way.
Oh, I'm going to, I have a bad habit of doing this. I'm going to violate the rules here. And instead of waiting for the Q&A, only because you touched on something that was the first question that somebody posted, which I know I'm not supposed to be looking at. But you were talking about lifelong learning. You were talking about what humanities research contributes to public culture. And the first question that someone posted was a very good one, because it is about lifelong learning, which is, what would you say to students debating the merits of a humanities degree? or an advanced degree in the humanities. And how does the NEH play a role in this? We're already there, so it seemed to me we might as well jump on it.
I would say, and I don't think that we're not told this, right? When you think about what is a humanities degree, or should I really major in the humanities? What does that mean? What am I going to be doing? And I think that the reality of it is doing humanities works takes a lot of courage, right? It's you're looking at some really difficult histories sometimes, painful histories, painful topics, and you're having to do it, and keep yourself strong, right? You have to really be able to say, I'm courageous enough to be able to come and do this. Some people talk about it as being fearless inquiry, right? I'm going to go into this topic. I'm going to go into this work. I'm going to be fearless. I'm going to be courageous. But what comes out of it is something that I think gives us courage and strength at the same time, right? It gives us the knowledge to be able to really assess and look at challenges that we have in the world today, challenges that we've seen or we will see coming, right? It could give us the insight to say, this might be something that's going to happen again. And if it does, how is it handled? Are there ways to think about addressing the challenges in a more fruitful manner? And I think that one of the things that NEH does is we hopefully are, supporting people and their courage and their ability to say, this is a really important topic that needs to be discussed and it needs to be researched. And not only that, but shared, right? The knowledge then needs to be shared. And that's even part of being the courageous part, is making sure that we're doing the good work, but that then we're sharing the good work afterwards. And you'll get lots of people asking you questions, right? And saying, well, I don't agree with that.
You will. And in some ways takes less courage than we think, even. With an NEH grant, I should say, the American Historical Association did a substantial public opinion survey in collaboration with the very professional public opinion pollsters at Fairleigh Dickinson University in New Jersey. And what we found was that a substantial majority of Americans actually think that history education should include engaging with painful histories, the kind of painful, uncomfortable histories that you referred to. And what was really interesting was this was nonpartisan. This was bipartisan. This was Republicans, Democrats, Independents. Everybody thought that history education, the engagement with history, should include these uncomfortable topics, which we were surprised. We found that fascinating, and it's one example of how an NEH grant can help us learn through the data that you were talking about, what it is we need to learn. Do you think it's also possible for the NEH to help us learn some of these things about the rest of the world as well? We've been talking very much about the United States, and obviously many of our eyes have been riveted to screens for the last few weeks about things happening in other parts of the world. How do you see the NEH making a difference there?
I've seen over the past 6 years, the applications that have come in, and I've seen how much of that work is actually looking at international experiences, international societies, and how, and so we do have to think, how is that work going to inform us? How is that work going to increase knowledge? And I think one of the real beauties, right, of humanity is, having that courage, but giving us the strength, is that in order to understand what is going on internationally, we have to understand that we are very much more moving into a global world. We have a global economy. We are maybe not for the first time, but very keenly becoming aware of how our place in the world is affected so much by what is going on in other countries. the things that we have, our ability to get up and go in our vehicles, right, is really it's affected by what's going on across the world. I think that having the humanities available to say, this is exactly what we do. We have to look at the challenges, the difficulties, and whether that's in this country or another country, there's going to be a lot of overlap. There's going to be a lot of looking at what's going on and saying, okay, you know what, maybe this has happened before, and where did it happen, and what happened, and why. And I think that that's the one of the bigger challenges, right? Is being able to understand not just from one side, and that's hard, especially with something that's going on right now, but understanding where what's the reasoning, why is this happening from both sides, and it's informing ourselves better, so we can understand and say, all right, well, now what do we need to do?
So I really like, in a sense, pushing that, the what do we need to do. We right now live in a country where I think there are too many people who have forgotten that that's what the government is here to do, is to help. There's been, as we all know, some rhetorical commentary in the past rejecting the notion, quite frankly, that the government is here to help, but a government of the people, by the people, and especially for the people is here to help. And in all of your conversation here about talking about how the NEH can help, let's flip that though. We have an audience here of scholars. We have an audience here of people who have engaged with the humanities, who understand the importance of understanding the past. How can we help? How can all these people listening, and I should say a lot of these people who are listening are going to be helping, because as Steve Kidd mentioned earlier, they're going on, metaphorically, up Capitol Hill tomorrow to talk to their legislators without having to climb the hill. But how can they help in other ways? How can we help the NEH and you do your job better?
Well, I have some very specific and easy asks, but maybe I'll start with the larger picture, right? So in this work, I think a lot of times I keep going back, and the timing was perfect for me. I keep going back to the new Norton poetry anthology that Joy Harjo worked on. And it's titled, When the Light of the World Was Subdued, Our Songs Came Through. And that to me tells me what it is that I need to do in this position, right? Because to me, the songs, that's humanities, right? Our songs are made up of our history, our philosophies, our languages, our understanding and perception of who we are in this world. And the more that we can do this humanities work, the more we can make sure our songs are coming through, and we can be addressing, those instances where the light does get subdued. And our songs are going to be what helps us, our songs and our work in the humanities are really going to be what helps us create a path, right, to move us forward and lead us on. And so I want everybody to be excited and help us, to bring our songs forward and to make sure that they're getting us through what we need to get through. And how can you do that? There's a bunch of different ways. So we talk about research, right? And one of the best ways to learn about what NEH does, to really plan out what research is needed and what good research looks like, is to serve on an NEH panel and to please review applications. And I know it's time consuming because I have to do it. It's part of my job, but I've been doing it for the past 6 years. We need experts to come in. We need experts to review applications and to give us feedback, and to get your foot in the door, to see what's going on. Or if you've had a grant before, right, to come back and read applications and help us to fund the best and those excellent programs that are out there.
Yeah,
That's one.
I want to put a fine point on that, because there are some things maybe that are easier for me to say than you to say. And one of them is that if you've served on a panel, you're more likely to write a successful proposal because you actually understand what it is that people argue about in those panel meetings where people do argue. And then the second is the, I hate to put it quite this way, but the selfishness issue. Anybody who's gotten a grant from the NEH, and that's why I can say this, you can't, I think has an obligation to sit on a panel to help other people share in the munificence that they were able to benefit from. So I would underscore everything you just said about people serving on panels. And it's also interesting and fun.
Yes,
Actually.
it is. It's you learn so much. It's amazing.
Are there other things, or should we just go to the Q&A? Are there other things you'd like people to do?
I think the other things are, really being a voice for humanities, right? We get a lot of questions and a lot of misunderstanding of what is humanities. And that's going to be a difficult one, right? We're always going to be trying to define humanities. What do we do? What is that? What exactly does that mean when we talk about humanities? But being a voice for humanities and the importance of the humanities, right? And how the humanities really is playing, a foundation for who we are, what we're looking forward to doing, and where we need to go. I think that being excited, right, about humanities and encouraging about humanities and talking about, the courage and the strength that humanities brings.
And I mean, I think that's interesting in terms of thinking about what, quote, what it is we do here in the humanities, because one of the things that we do is we disagree with one another. And there's been a lot of, as we all know, talk in public culture about the decline of civil disagreement, issues with social media. So I want to model that for just a second, because one of our questions is actually disagreeing with you, politely, of course, but it's someone who was struck by you starting off with your anecdote about being bad at math, and suggesting that maybe that's not a good way of thinking about the humanities because of the digital humanities, and in fact, because of even what you just said about data. So how does the NEH, do you think, play a role, in fact, in breaking down the very dichotomy that you started with?
Well, I think that exactly right. We have to use the sciences. We have to use math. We have to have analysts who are coming in and looking at our data. And of course, the fact that I failed calculus, that's just me. That just really steered me away from the sciences. But I think that, we are working right now with our fellow agencies, NIH, NSF. We're really identifying a lot of the overlap. And I should say that I've read for NIH for some of their applications, and I can see the humanities work in some of the projects that they are funding and the applications that they're taking in. And I think that there are great ways for us to really start working together and to really building a collaborative mindset and way of melding humanities work and some of this cultural aspects of projects that we fund with the sciences, with health in particular, right? And I don't think that they are separate in any way. I think that humanities informs everything. Humanities informs the sciences, right? And I think that NEH, we can very much work to bring that collaboration together.
Okay, so let's move for now, and then we'll come back to collaboration. Let's move a little bit away from something as nice and sweet and fuzzy and warm as collaboration, and go to the elephant in the room, which you hinted at earlier with your reference to uncomfortable histories, to painful histories. There are at least two people in our audience who are interested in how you, as a scholar and as the incoming chair, would advise people to think about the issues that are arising in many states relating to what people should be teaching in the classroom, the labeling of some theories as things that we shouldn't be doing, the labeling of some aspects of American culture and life as things that we shouldn't be introducing to children at a certain age. Again, without thinking in a partisan way. How would you advise people in this audience to have input into these issues and to think about them in a way that enables us to speak to those people who disagree with us?
Right. I think, having been in higher education for so long, one of the things that I'm still learning, like I said, and one of the things that I'm learning are kind of the foundations, the theoretical, the knowledge foundations that make up some of the growing disciplines that we're seeing today, right? African American studies, gender studies, Native American Indigenous studies, critical race studies, right? I still have to inform myself and educate myself about what are those disciplines built upon, what are the legal theories that they rely upon, what are the premises and the foundations that really build these disciplines. And if I can get a better sense of what builds these disciplines, I can get a better sense of, okay, now if we're going to talk about this decision to not allow certain conversations, well, what does this discipline tell me could be ways to analyze that discussion, ways to think about a new lens of looking at it, right? And I do think that maybe one of the things that we do is we don't rely on different lenses. We're not looking at different disciplines and humanities. The nice thing about that is we're so diverse in terms of disciplines. We tend to try to look at it with one lens. And I would like to encourage and invite individuals to really try to take a look at it with different lenses, different disciplines, and get an understanding of, if I was going to look at it this way, what would my argument sound like then? Or what would their argument sound like, right? Because having a better understanding of how people might be coming towards this topic is, in my opinion, always much more helpful. But that's my opinion, right?
Well, but I think actually, this notion of the relationship between opinion and evidence-based learning is an important one, especially given the research mission of the NEH, that there is a difference between having an opinion and having an informed opinion that's informed by the kinds of data that you were saying earlier the NEH needs to gather. But I am curious about when you talk about the diversity, the importance of the diversity of disciplines, creating different lenses. And we have a few questions about encouraging dialogue through the humanities, which is important. And I'm going to shamelessly admit I am privileging one of the questions that is being asked by my partner in Advocacy Day tomorrow. So we think about those different lenses in terms of demographic categories that are fairly standard, that we all understand. You were just talking about the importance of those different lenses in terms of disciplines. Mm-hmm. What's the role, do you think, of the NEH in encouraging that kind of dialogue also across the many different ways that Americans have of seeing our institutions, of seeing our schools? Does the NEH have a role in basically helping us more effectively have this kind of dialogue among people who disagree with one another?
I think that one of the roles that we can play in the humanities, and we see this through the state humanities councils quite often, right? I've seen quite a few state humanities councils have spaces for difficult conversations, and bringing in trained mediators or having workshops to train individuals to lead these conversations, right? Because it is so important, particularly if you're in a rural area, right? And there's a real difference of opinion between your residents of certain topics, right? How can you bring people together to talk about these have these conversations and talk about these topics? And I do feel that NEH, can very much help to bring these conversations forward, but to really prepare individuals who can lead these conversations. And because we have to have individuals who are really open to having both sides of a topic being discussed and being brought forward. And, I think that our state councils have been a really great model for that.
I would agree. I think the state councils especially do a great job with that. So one of our participants wants to know how you would distinguish, and this is a tough question, and how you would distinguish between the humanities and the social sciences, how you see, and I think you could ask that about anything, humanities and arts, whatever, but how you see the specific role of the humanities in addressing some of the issues that you've been describing. This person is asking also about the unique role of the humanities, and I would probably argue that uniqueness is less important than collaboration, but it's a reasonable question. Is there a unique role that the humanities plays, and how does it differ? Social sciences, arts, how do you see the NEH playing this role? This is a tough one.
Well, it's tough, but it's not tough, right? I'm still going to argue that humanities is the foundation. So kind of one of my examples is, and I think I was speaking to one of the senators, and I said, I'm Navajo. I grew up in a Navajo community and surrounded by Navajo culture. And we have a lot of students who want to go and be doctors. And they're going to be doctors, right? They're going to be Navajo doctors. And that's where humanities plays a point, right? It's not just that you're going to be a doctor. You're going to be a Navajo doctor. You're going to go about it and you're going to do your work from your Navajo perspective and your Navajo understanding and cultural background. And that means you might do it a little bit differently, right? You're going to have to think about cultural issues, particularly if you're coming home to work on the Navajo reservation. Same thing for my work in sociology. I came from a very specific, we couldn't do Native studies as a degree at that time, but I came to it with a real foundation of understanding who I was, coming from a Navajo reservation, small, rural, poor area. And that really informed how I interacted with theories in sociology, the work that I chose then to focus on, and the lenses that I chose to do that work in. And I think that happens in all disciplines. And I love my art. I love my artists. But I've always said art is how you smell, taste, see, hear, feel humanities, right? It's where the foundation.
That's a
love my artist. Love my artist.
I've never heard it put that way. I really like that. And we're running out of time, but I'm also going to pick up on, just very quickly, your reference to people becoming medical professionals and the humanities, because I get my 1-minute commercial here, which is a reminder to everybody in the audience what the first thing is that a medical professional, whether it's a physical therapist, a doctor, or a nurse, what's the first thing that they do when they walk into that room and the patient is standing there? The first thing they do is they take a history. And the questions that they ask depend upon what they think history is. And as you've just suggested, that would matter according to cultural background, according to the kinds of questions different people ask. And I want to thank you for your patience in engaging our audience, being willing to disagree with you, being able to answer difficult questions, because that's what we do in the humanities. So thank you very much. And we all look forward to working with you over the coming years.
Thank you, Ahiahet, and thank you for the National Humanities Alliance. Thanks for all the work that you do and all the support that you give us.